firstly, tonight, I didn't have any special subject to talk about. And I didn't know what you wanted to hear. So it was suggested to me that I should talk a little bit about how somebody like myself comes to be practicing Buddhism, so that maybe you can get some reflections for yourselves about how you are practicing. And then I will expand it to deal with the problems of choosing practice for each of us, a practice which is relevant and useful. So the title of this evening is, How Does One Come to the Path? Or is one on it from the beginning? So some people will say, life is the path, and from the moment you are born, your spiritual journey is happening. And I think from a Buddhist perspective, one would have to agree with that, except that the defilements and the attachment of life are so strong for most of us that we don't really accomplish very much during our lives. I remember talking to someone who was connected with the Tibetans and saying about of all the bodhisattva is the being who is vowed to come back and always to serve, that very few of them must actually do anything. And they said, oh yes, maybe only 5% of people manage to do something useful during their life. So in my own case, I was born English but brought up in other countries. My father was working for the government. So I was born in an Arab country in Egypt, and I traveled in different countries, and then I went to school in England. So by the time I had been to school in England, I had lived in Arabia, I had lived in Canada, I had been in different schools and different cultures. And I had always problems from the start in taking my own culture seriously. And I think one of the ways that this caused me to be interested in yoga and what Ajahn Buddhadasa and Suan Mokkh calls natural science is the fact that if you live in different countries and different cultures, you see many different approaches to the same problem. For example, in India, they don't eat meat. In Arabia, they have only meat to eat. In the desert, you have only dried meat, actually. The Bedouin are carrying sticks of dried goat and so on. But in all of these places, you will find people who are very much liberated from the normal condition, who are beautiful and compassionate and self-sacrificing. So the question for me was that all the cultural forms started to appear to me to be more of a trap than of something useful. And that whenever you found an individual, whether it's in Asia or Arabia or England or America, who had some special quality about him, normally he had also another quality, that he was tough, or she was tough enough to cut away the weeds and the leaves for the trees, etc. And this was something very important to understand, that most of us are attached to good or to bad. Now, Ajahn Buddhadasa and Suan Mokkh likes to teach very strongly transcending positive and negative. That if you are a true Buddhist and you are learning to see life as it really is, you will transcend the attachment to positive and to negative. Now, we all know about negative and what negative things cause to all of us. But the positive things people overlook very often. So what is attachment to positive? In this case, in terms of cultural conditioning, that you bring up the children and we encourage them to go to the temple and to light incense, for example, in Asia, and to bow in front of the statue. And you encourage certain cultural values, certain ways of behaving, ways of having a family. And these things themselves are also a cause of attachment, that we get attached to these things. We are not free from these things. When people are attached to their religion, they begin to have a certain pride in their religion, and they start to scorn other religions, and they look down on other religions and other cultures. And at the end of the road, then you have the religious war. The Christians were famous for this. I have to admit that the Christians went all over the world killing people in the name of Christ. And when you look at these things, there are many areas, but just looking at this attachment to the positive, this was a major thing, that a disenchantment with my own culture, that even though I was educated by Benedictine monks and I was in a religious school, which was a very progressive school, they were not used to giving the teaching, real teachings, to the people so that they could make up their own mind. That there was an element of superstition, or you had to believe the priest, or God was something that only the saints could talk to, and we just have to believe He is there. And you couldn't make up your own mind. Now this is not only a problem with the Christians. In England at the moment, the Christian, Catholic and the Protestant Church are losing a lot of priests, and they are not getting new priests. And the young priests are leaving the church. Some of them are remaining priests, but they are making their own churches. And they are behaving more like, rather like you are doing here. They have a community, they have projects, they help local people, needy people, and they are practicing yoga and psychotherapy and different things like this. In Thailand with Buddhism it was a little bit the same. Ajahn Buddhadasa was one of the first to insist on teaching dependent origination. You know what this is? Paticca Samuppada to the people. Whereas in England we had the priest who said, if you are not good, you will burn in the fires of hell. This was the Christian thing. And the Buddhist one was, if you are not good, next life you will be a dog or a scorpion or a very ugly fish in the sea, something like this. So basically it means that when you accept, the people who are accepting a religion, they are coming from good motivation. They want to do right, they want to do good. But it is still very suspect, because the decision is being influenced by fear, by superstition. So many people actually, they cannot prove that there is a future life. They have never been to hell, for example. They don't know if God really exists. They cannot prove it. But because they are scared, and this is a basic ego mechanism, to have fear for ourselves, they accept the religion on this basis. So the attraction for somebody who is practicing the yogas, or and in India the Buddha was called the Lord of Yogis, is that first of all you test everything that you confront. This is the first the most important thing. So when the Buddha decided to leave his kingdom and everything, there is the famous story that he saw the nimitta, he saw the four signs. He saw a sick person, an old person, a dead person, and then he saw a samana, an ascetic. Now, for me, this is not just a pretty fairy story, but this is a very, very important point, that the turning point in Gautam's life, the trigger for his search, were these images of impermanence and decay. And if we consider our attachment to religions and our attachment to groups and everything, it cannot hold up if we remember these signs. That even a religion will have its day and it will pass away. Even a great Christian culture or a Buddhist culture, or now the Muslim culture is rising at the moment. So all these things are subject to the same laws that we have on the planet. They are all rising and fading away at the same time. So the truly spiritual person has to be aware of that at the same time, and has to have some distance even from his own thing. That this is the most important thing. I have spent a lot of time traveling in Asia and also in Europe, going to centers and religious places, monasteries. The amount of prejudice and the amount of bigotry and that you find in this is more than on the streets often. You think you go into a religious center for refuge, but actually it's kind of living hell sometimes, because the people don't have strong enough practice to face the essential reality. That's why the yogic path, or the path also of the Buddha, and in all the religions, I would say they are sustained by the mystics, who are always the people to take away all the clothing of the culture and strip it down to the bare bones and keep it alive and to keep it essential. So the problem is, once you have had some type of awakening, you have seen your dead man, you have seen your sick man, you have had some disillusionment or whatever, the question then for us is to deprogram. Because it's not enough to have one minute you have an inspired revelation and you see the truth, and then the next day you are just the same old person. You are in love, or you are sad, or you have problems at work, or you want a beer, or whatever. You have the normal things which are in there. This is where, for example, in our cultures, and I think actually in Thailand now, many people have disillusionment with religion as it has been practiced. It's very interesting to see that here, I think also, but in Thailand, they are having a movement that is similar to what we had 20 years ago. That 6 years ago when I started meditating in Suam Mok, and the retreats had just started 1 year before. It was only Falang, only foreigners who were making retreats. Whereas now more and more Thai people are coming. And we have a retreat every month, and they have a retreat every 2 months, but sometimes 200 people. So the general movement amongst not only young people, but basically young people in Thailand is now to practice and to find out for themselves. And I think this is, the yogis say, never accept anything that you have not experienced for yourself. So Gautam, when he left the palace and he went down to India, he went to the great yogis of the day to get instruction. So at this time you have to imagine there was no such thing as Buddhism at that time. I mean, there was no Buddha, so there had never been Buddhism. So he was a man like us who just went on his trip looking for people who could help him, and he went to the best people of the day, the most reputed yogis. And he had a very great reputation as a yogi. He was considered a very adept, advanced yogi, and he was normally invited by his teachers to join them and to teach them, and he was treated as an equal, as one of the great yogis of the day. He still didn't get the liberation that he wanted. The final path he went on was he was with the 5 ascetic friends, and he was eating, I think, 1 grain of mustard seed a day for 5 years or something very terrible. And he was washing himself in the river doing his toilet one day, and he fell over and he couldn't get up, and he had to be helped out of the river. So at that point he decided this had gone far enough, and he went under a tree and a little bit of shade, and he made a seat, and he accepted some food, rice soup, from a village girl. So his friends were disgusted with him, and they considered that he had fallen from the path, so they rejected him and they left. Now this is the second important point, that this was the birth, if you want, of the middle way. That when you practice, if you are doing Buddhist practice, then you are not going to either of the 2 extremes. Your practice will never be a full indulgence in pleasure, even though as lay people we can enjoy life. But it is not out and out hedonism, and it is not extreme asceticism. Even though there are famous Buddhist yogis who have done ascetic practices. But generally, I know, for example, in Suan Mok, people who decide, for example, not to lie down or to stand up for a few weeks or to fast very strongly, generally they think a lot before they do this, and they have a lot of talks with their spiritual friends to make sure that there is not an element of fascism or strong attitude to pushing through, because this is not really a part of the middle way. So let us assume that we have all decided to practice, that as Ajahn Buddhadasa in Suan Mok in Thailand, he doesn't like to say Buddhism, and he doesn't like to call it a religion either. He likes to call it Buddha Dhamma or Buddha Sasana, that it's Buddhist practice. I think that's the first important thing to see, that you look at it in a natural science, as a natural science, that it's a practical problem. From the moment we decided that we want to practice, we have to be very practical about our life. So first, that means seeing who we are, first of all, naked and without clothes on, so to speak, so that we know what problem we've got. It's no good shooting for the stars if you don't know what type of car or aeroplane you are in. So if you want to go high, you need a rocket, not an old 2-engined aeroplane like this. So most of us, if you are doing it from insight and from practicing meditation, then mostly the first stage when you sit, like if you are taking precepts, and we have done now couple of days we are sitting, we'll do a few more in the Cameron Highlands. So for most of us, it will not be greatly successful. 1 or 2 people might have a flash. This happens sometimes. But generally speaking, when you are sitting and when you are walking, you are not in heaven, you are not in bliss, but you are struggling with the monkey mind, which is running around, and the angry mind, which is coming back, and the old girlfriend or boyfriend or the boss who has done you some wrong or whatever. And this is coming up and bothering us all the time. So this is actually an essential part of practice. It's not to be confused with real insight. It's not, we are not yet at the stage of real insight, but you are at the stage where you take stock of yourself. And this is very, very important. As an example, you can only think of how many gurus and teachers and monks and nuns have had quite a brilliant career for 20 years and then fall in disgrace about either some relationship or getting angry or suddenly change their minds. And often in my experience it's because there wasn't enough hard work done just seeing who we are, admitting who we are in the first place. So this is a very uncomfortable period, a very difficult period when you're actually looking at yourself like that. And I think that the Eightfold Noble Path, Noble Eightfold Path, was really one of the main reasons for having that, is to help you through this period. Later on, when you get into the absorbed states of concentration, the jhanas, at the beginning you have qualities like the investigative mind and the mind which is experiencing the investigation and rapture, piti. And as you get to higher levels of concentration, these drop away. So that the person who has developed a strong samadhi, he starts to flow more naturally in the Dharma. His practice becomes a more natural unfolding because he doesn't have to inquire so much anymore. He has answered a lot of his basic questions. He has learned to stabilize himself. And therefore, even though he still has a long way to go, basically every day is a working day, and every day his Dharma mind is more or less present. But for us at the beginning, our Dharma mind is sometimes there and sometimes it's out the window. So the problem for us is how to develop a mind which will profit from every situation. So in other words, a mind that will see inside the true nature of what is happening. If you have an emotion, first of all, you can admit, okay, I'm angry, or I have desire, or I have doubt. Whereas normally what we have is our own projections. We are seeing things through our own projection. For example, if somebody presses your button and you get angry, normally one turns around and says, you have no right to do that. But actually what happened is that either by a look or by a word or a tone of voice or some contact in the sense field from your ear or your eye or in the mind, something pressed a very sensitive button in your system. And it gave you a feeling. You experience that as a feeling. And you perceive that feeling in a certain way. And from that perception arises the thoughts. Now this happens so fast that in one split second you turn around and you have already justified your anger. You have no right to do that. You should get out of here. You should not, etc. You ought not to do this. This happens so fast that we are not conscious of it. So the first stage of practicing vipassana or insight meditation is just to watch this mechanism. To learn to, so the Eightfold Noble Path at this point helps to maintain, if you are practicing sila and right speech and right action, etc., then you try to control your life so that you are complicating your mind as little as possible. That's the first thing. So that when you sit down every day, you are not completely like scrambled eggs inside the mind and hot. You have a little bit of concentration. You can sit there, and with a little detachment you can witness yourself. You can see how you are at that point. And once you have seen that, one just spends a lot of time trying to refine that watching process. So that as you sit there, the first problem is that when we sit still, after a while, all the heat and the programming we have inside us starts to agitate, because it's like having 100 dogs inside you, and the dogs like to go for a walk every now and then. So when you sit down for a day or for 2 days or 4 days, the dogs don't get a walk. They don't go running around. You don't talk to people. Nobody flatters you. Nobody looks at you. You cannot exercise power. You cannot be successful. You cannot have a flirtation. All these things. I have a lot of friends in the West where we have been trying for 25 years to practice freedom. Freedom of sex, freedom of speech, freedom of everything. So I have a lot of friends who say, well, I am not worried in my life, we are free. And I have a normal life, I have a good job, I help people, I go to hear some music twice a week, and I have a balanced life. Yes and no. The proof is, if I take one of those friends and put them in a 10-day retreat, after 5 days they are climbing the walls. Now, the point is not that they don't have a balanced life. They do have a balanced life. The point is that we are not free of that. That the life we've chosen is all the same a type of compulsion. It's come from our programming. We are not free of our programming. And we have managed, it's already something. It's good that we managed to channel it into positive work. So for example, when you develop the 10 parameters, or when we practice dana and all these things, we are taking energy and trying to use it in a constructive way and channel our energy into something. As you develop in insight, you are trying to actually get further down and cut off the roots of our impulses. Now this is a tricky work, it's a very long work, and it's a very sad process often. It means admitting an awful lot as you look at it. So you cannot do it unless you have a rounded practice. You need to have basic health, you need to have a developing concentration, and you need to have a Dhamma mind which is always deepening. Because when you get an insight, a true insight, sometimes it's so sad that people can die actually from. I know a very sad story of a woman in America, a young woman who had cancer, and she tried for 6 years to heal her cancer by meditation and by medical means also, but by spiritual means. And the last 2 years she was going flat out, and it didn't work. So finally the doctor said, you have about maximum 3 months to live. So she went down to a very nice part of the States for her last holiday on the planet, basically. And when they were there for a 6-week holiday, they met a famous healer, one of the top healers in the States. And in only 2 sessions of putting on the hands, she was completely healed. And 2 weeks later, this girl committed suicide. Yes, it's a very extraordinary story, actually. And they decided, in the end, they felt very strongly that the healer had perhaps made a mistake, that he had let her believe somehow that he healed her. Now, firstly, you cannot heal anybody. All the 6 years' work she had made had prepared her mind for changing and for dealing with this situation. But she felt that he had healed her, and she had been struggling for 6 years, and this guy, with just 2 20-minute sessions, put his hands on, healed her, and she felt very humiliated. And so she committed suicide. Now, this was an illusion, actually, because in fact she did heal herself. But the shock of certain things, when we see how foolish we have been, when we see how attached we have been, when we really experience the dukkha of life, then this is a strong thing on the system. This is not something for joking, actually. So, in the system, say in Suan Mok, they don't use yoga so much. The Westerners, we use yoga because most of us, we have trouble sitting down. Unlike the Asian people, we cannot sit so easy. So the yoga is important. But they sit and they walk, walking meditation, and that's their exercise. In the Indian yoga, to develop samadhi and sati, the mindfulness, the hatha yoga, what we do in the morning, this is what they use mostly to develop samadhi for most people. And it corresponds to the same level. So, for example, let's put it in the context of anapanasati. You have 16 steps or lessons in 4 groups, and they correspond to the 4 foundations of mindfulness. So the first group, you are dealing with the breath and the body, or they call the 2 kaya, the 2 bodies. So at this level, and especially if you can have just a moment of first jhana, of absorption or one-pointedness, full one-pointedness, this is a type of, will have an effect on the body. It's a very strong, has a strong effect on the body. And the second group, which is the feelings, the Vedana, you meditate on, you contemplate the feelings that arise from practicing the first 4 steps. So in the first steps we do the long breath and we do short breath. Then you see how the breath conditions the body, and then you learn how to calm down the body and the breath. When the body and the breath are calmed down, you have a one-pointed mind, even for only a second, but you get this one-pointedness. You have a natural feeling of rapture and bliss, which will arise in the body. Now, this well-being in the body is essential, and in my experience, all groups around the world have some method of developing this. The Islamic mystics, they dance, the whirling dervishes of Turkey, for example. They have music and they dance, but the first thing that happens when they start to turn is that they get this blissful feeling. And having this rapture, this piti, is extremely important for your practice. Ajahn Buddhadasa calls it's the fuel, it's like the petrol of your practice. So sometimes it's very exaggerated. People have tears, or the hair is standing up, or you have goosebumps and feelings on the body. that's one side. The more important side of it is that rapture starts with knowing, just experiencing that good feeling. When you get one-pointed, you know it. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to investigate. You have instant realization. You know, that's a one-pointed mind. And from knowing that, you get some rapture of it. From perceiving that, you get more rapture. From seeing the perception of the knowing, you get more rapture. And so the rapture is actually the mind feeds on the success. It feeds on right living and right conduct and right way of being. This is the important thing. So if you take away all the, how can I say, all the clothing of different religions and different cultures, and you reduce it to the bare bones of a natural science, we are dealing with mental and physical health. So the first thing that has to happen is that we have to work with the body and calm that down. When that has started to happen, feelings will be arising. And so then we learn to deal with feelings. Now, the main reason you learn to deal with feelings is so that you can use them, but you can transcend them at the same time, so that we are no longer attached to feelings. Because actually feelings are the basis of all the trouble that we experience in the planet at the moment. Feeling is the basis of ego, it's the basis of attachment, it's the basis of self. Western countries, we are very mental countries. There was a famous French philosopher, Descartes, and he said, "I think, therefore I am." So even when we are doing meditation courses, some people come for interview in a state of panic, and they are saying, what happens if I stop thinking? You know, will I die? And they have tremendous resistance to stopping thinking. This is actually a real problem for some people. So the first thing we try to explain to a Westerner is that there are not just 5 senses, but there are 6 senses. And your mind is also just a sense organ, function to think, object ideas. So that they see it as a conditioned and a programmed thing. One of the best ways for someone to start getting glimpses of insight is to somehow challenge that ego so that you have an anxiety attack. For example, some people, when they first get one-pointed and there is no thought for a moment, if you ask them in an interview, so what happened next? Oh, my heart started going and they had an anxiety attack. Because it's not a full enlightenment, but there is a moment of no ego. There is a moment where you flow into the situation. And immediately the ego feels very threatened that something is dying there. And the ego says, wait a minute, I'm not involved here, what's going on? And wants to step in fast and do something about it. So another way of doing that is to take people to, in India, for example, they burn the bodies in public when people die. And in some places they just throw the bodies someplace. So one way is to take people just to look at dead bodies until they get a little bit of a shock. And it makes them realize, really that...
Yes, at present there is to practice this now.
Yeah, and it's also a Buddhist... There are 40 classic Buddhist meditations in the Visuddhimagga, and 10 of them are dealing with the loathsome objects, you know. So even monks in Thailand are doing it sometimes, going to the hospital once a week, for example, to see the dead corpse and different types of dead corpses, you know.
I mean, when it's present this time, certain, like you say, the burn the body, or just throw the coffin, certain rural area, this type of practice still in existence.
Ah, yeah. And burning is the traditional way. If somebody dies in India, it's normally very quick, in a few hours. If I died, then they would just say, "Oh, Sean is gone." Then they would send somebody to the village to get some wood, and some friends would wash you down, maybe put some clothes on, and then the drummers come and they drum, and then they bring a stretcher, and they put you on a stretcher and take you to the nearest site and just burn you. And normally in a few hours it's all gone. It's very good actually. Very quick. So what would you do in Malaysia? You have to go in the crematorium there. If you ever have a chance to go to India and you go in the famous Benares, Varanasi, and you go in the Ganga, which is the Ganges river, it's the holy river. So especially if you go now in the monsoon time, where the river is up and it's full of stuff, and if people are very poor, they cannot afford to burn, they cannot afford the wood because this wood is very expensive. So they just put one piece of burning wood in the mouth and then they throw the body in the river. So if you go for a holy bath in the river, you have many strange things floating floating past you, sometimes bumping into your body. And this is a very good meditation on impermanence, you know. It's actually one of the best meditations I know is to go to the river and see babies and animals, and babies also, they don't burn often. So the babies, they will just put whole in the river, you know. So right. Then you cut off the skin.
Until the body, until the flesh dry up, just like wood.
Yeah, like wood. And then it's powder, it goes like powder. In Tibet, in certain parts of Tibet, they still have sky burial. They call it sky. They take your body and they just chop it up and they leave it on a rock for the birds. And the birds come and they eat it dry, yeah. In Tibet. But also in India, the Jains. There's one particular group, Parsis, I think. In Bombay, they have a tower, and they just put the body on the top for the birds. And then, I don't know about the Parsi, but the Tibetans, when it's clean, then they take the bones and they powder. They crush them up, pulverize them, and then throw the powder into the air. Yeah. So there's nothing left. It's very clean, actually. Yeah. And you feed the birds at the same time. It's useful. It's a very useful way of doing it. So these are all ways of I don't know if for you. For myself, I have spent some time in India looking at the burning bodies and looking at sick people. A lot of my friends, when they go to India, they go to the Mother Teresa hospital, for example. Anybody can go and work So actually a lot of friends who study meditation and used to go to India, when we go to Calcutta, we will go, in the morning you go to the dying hospital, and you just take an apron and you work in the morning, and you have very sick people, and you have voluntary worker, yeah, and they are very sick people. It's a hospital only for dying people. So they cannot go to the toilet. You have to wash them. You have to do everything. So this is also a very good way of getting rid of some of your, changing your mind a little bit, and just loosening up, being aware of impermanence, but also we are very precious, and there is so much hypocrisy in Dharma, in religious people, that they like to they go to the trouble to find a good practice and a good Dharma and a good teacher and maybe even a good group, but then if we are not careful, we slip back again, and then this is a kind of protection, I belong to the Central Dharma group. Yes, very good Dharma group. And thank you very much. Thank you. And you become attached to your group and a little bit complacent, and you don't think about it so much, and you think, yeah, well, I have a good life. Now the real way to practice is to go through all the points of Dharma so often that every time you practice, your motivation is fresh. Because one of the problems is that when we start, for example, most of us, we have a turning point, like Gautam, Buddha, he saw the 4 signs, and then he decided to leave his palace and to go and try and work out the path. Now, most of us have a similar type of situation. We have little determining points in our lives, and after that, we tend to relax a little bit. So, for example, for me, the last big shock in my life may have been 2 years ago, and so then I have decided that I will go and practice. Huh? He's listening to the Dhamma. He's a Dhamma dog. So, when you have these crisis points in the life, or a high point in your life, we make a decision and we decide, we have an intense period of thinking, of searching, of activity, and then you decide, okay, I'm going to practice like this, I'm going to practice with these people, and you start a new thing in the life. And then we tend to forget about it. So that when we sit down to do our meditation again, it's just like a normal thing. It's like sitting in your car, Sit in the car, turn on the radio, sit down, And we are not really thinking about it. Or you are just trying to be happy. Or you are just repeating it. You have already become a kind of imitation of yourself, remembering all the reasons to practice Dharma all the time. Now this is mindfulness, sati. Sati is like, in the original language, it was an arrow, something very fast. So it's the part of your mind, if you are bicycling along the street and a friend suddenly calls from the side of the street, "Hi Sean, how are you?" And a friend suddenly calls from the side of the street, "Hi Sean, how are you?" And you're in the middle of traffic and you have cars and things, so you can turn and say, "Hi, fine, how are you? See you later." And you keep bicycling and you keep one eye on the car in front of you and the car beside you, etc. So the mind cannot be really in 2 places at once, but there has a very fast faculty which can shoot from side to side, checking. Now this is mindfulness. And mindful in English is the same root as remind. and remember. So you are mindful of what? You are not just aware. This is something that people forget sometimes. If you just practice technique, you will get very good awareness. You will get concentration that is very fine and very strong. And you will be very aware. But for Dhamma, it's not good enough. Awareness is not enough. You have to be mindful and mindful of the Dhamma all the time, so that you are aware at each moment, because we get subtle attachments to ourselves. When you see in the textbooks about the last obstacles for enlightenment, attachment to purity, certain doubts, equanimity, and finally ignorance. These are some of the last qualities that a very noble person has to get rid of. These will be blocks for very advanced monks and practitioners. Being attached to their own practice, being attached to their own purity, being attached to the path that took them right to the edge. They are nearly enlightened, so they can get very attached to the particular path they use, if they are Christian or if they are Buddhist or whatever. So really you have to find in yourselves a way of reducing your ego all the time, so that when you sit, you are just watching the conditioning. You are not thinking of ego, you are watching the sankharas, the formations, the conditioning that is there. And you are seeing it only as conditioning, you are not looking at it as something of your own, as something special to you. If you don't think about this a lot, you will certainly, without realizing it, you will get attached to your yoga or to your sitting. And that was another good session, And you will go home, you will feel like a good day's work, And certainly the pride and the ego will come, and you get it out the front door and it runs around and comes in the back door. All the time. And this is a constant struggle. So really when they say that all dhammas are impermanent, this is such an important thing to consider. That it's really the heart of the Buddha Dhamma. So, if awareness is not enough, what is samadhi exactly? How would you describe samadhi? Okay, so what do you think of concentration? How would you describe concentration?
Indeed, exactly free of wrong, free of anger, and free of illusion.
Free of illusion. And you would say concentration is like that? Yeah. Eric, how would you describe concentration?
To me, it's like direct attention on one particular object. No other diversion. Nothing diversion.
So, if I pull out a knife and threw it into your heart, it would be good concentration. Or what?
If that is the object of concentration, that depends on that depends on how well the person has practiced.
Right. Anybody else, what do you think?
Calmness of the mind.
Calmness of the mind, yeah.
You will see concentration. It is direct concentration.
Right, okay. Now this is the important point. That when you are developing, many people tend to split the practice into samadhi and into insight, vipassana. Right? So they will come to Swanmok, where we put Ajahn Buddhadasa likes to teach the full practice of anapanasati. So the last group of 4 is the pure vipassana. The other groups are not pure vipassana, they are more like concentration practice. And then they will say, you are not doing insight here, you are doing only concentration. Now, true concentration has wisdom, must have wisdom. So I would say it's both of yours together, that you have this one point in mind capable of being right on in one place and nowhere else, but it has to be pure at the same time. Samadhi. That's why we always use the word samadhi and not concentration, because for a Westerner, concentration is more like shh, I'm concentrating, don't talk, and tension and eyebrows, and real samadhi means sitting with fixed attention on one spot. But in the Buddha Dharma, samadhi, proper samadhi, means also samahito. I've written it up, you can look later. The first quality is stability. It's what Eric was talking about, that you gather and you collect all the faculties of your mind onto one point. So if we are working here or on your stomach or whatever your point of concentration is, gradually you gather all your attention and all your faculties at that one particular point. If you have got more advanced, then you can actually contemplate something in the mind, like a thought or an idea, and you bring all your faculties to bear on that one subject. But you have also the second quality, which is purity. That's what you were talking about. That you have to have a pure mind. And the third quality is activeness or readiness. So the example I like to use about this is nowadays kung fu films are very popular, right? Kung fu is so. You know the kung fu, or like the samurai, he's very cool, he's just totally relaxed, and suddenly chop up and then relax again. So this is good samadhi. When you are in a state of intense readiness or activity, but you are not, it's not impulsive, it's not pushing you to anything. You are just there, ready to act when you have to act. So, for example, if you have a good samadhi, and it's a real Dhamma samadhi, then when defilement or the ego starts to play, you will catch it and take action. Put it out. Get back on the job. You watch the things happen, and you get quicker and stronger at dealing with these things. To develop that, you need to have a good wisdom. For example, if you only develop concentration in the ordinary sense, you will see later on, maybe not immediately, but you will see later on in your practice that you have got problems, because if you just develop concentration by the force of your character, or by your ego, or by desire, for example, there will come a moment where this will not work for you, or that the force of that very concentration will block you, because it is tainted with the ego, because there is an element of desire there, or fear. This is a very important point. We have cases of people having extraordinary experiences in meditation sometimes, which are not useful at all. The mind can create anything. So if you want to just have an experience of voidness or whatever, you might have an experience of voidness, and it will be more like a hallucination, but a very convincing hallucination. And this can be produced by impure samadhi. Your samadhi has to be based on the fact that of impermanence, dukkha, and anatta, of not self, the three characteristics. This has to be really the basis of the thing. So that brings us back to the Buddha and his four signs of the sick man, the old man, the dead man, and the ascetic. That actually that is the heart of the process, you could say. It's coming back to that. And seeing that it in the mind, it doesn't have to be produced by extraordinary punishment on the body, by heavy ascetic practices, or anything like that. It's a question of moderation and finding the middle way, just so that you can observe what's happening. And when you finally start to get good samadhi, then your whole life starts to become the meditation, because you can see your whole life also becomes very uncomfortable, because at that point you are constantly watching your own ego and your own desires, and you are at this uncomfortable stage where you haven't got rid of them, but you notice them also at the same time. You are not deluded anymore. So you walk around very uncomfortable with yourself, feeling rather exposed and watching all hour. But this is what gives us real compassion. Suffering that, the suffering of attachment, the suffering caused by attachment. And I would only pass on something that all the great teachers that I met, whenever they were asked what is the sign of a great practitioner, they would never say somebody who can get on the 8th jhana, or somebody who can fly through the air, or a great speaker. They would only say that you have a stronger sense of suffering, and from that stronger sense of suffering, and everybody's suffering, you have deeper compassion. And this is the greatest power, and this is the greatest thing to possess, really. One last thing I would say is that, having said that the wisdom and the samadhi go together, as far as individual practitioners, the problem for us is that we have different characters. So some people will find that they can, for example, they can concentrate in an ordinary sense, and they have strength of concentration. For other people, this will be more difficult, because real samadhi means tranquility meditation, samatha. It means calmly abiding in one place, sitting in one place. So there are certain types of people with a very strong mind. This drives them crazy. I'm a little bit like that myself sometimes. That if you have to sit down for 8 hours a day, some people it's like poison. It will just make them more and more angry and more uncomfortable. And some people find it just because they have an active mind, or whatever reason, maybe they are not physically very strong or something, they are sick or whatever, they cannot get samadhi just by tranquility. So you have this Cheto Vimutti, which means liberation through the power of the mind. Now that would be somebody who can really concentrate their mind, and they will develop concentration states, now jhana and absorption. Now these do not get rid of your conditioning permanently. They are temporary pure states, but they give you also certain power of the mind and certain paranormal powers. So the yogi or the meditator would then use that power of the mind to cut through his defilements and to cut through the problems that they are experiencing. The other way would be Panya Vimutti, which is liberation through wisdom. Now, in this case, your samadhi grows as your wisdom grows. So somebody, for example, who cannot sit for a physical reason, or they have a hyperactive mind, and it just makes them very angry to do calm practices all the time. Somebody like that would be better off working, but they have to get a clear understanding of the Dhamma, a very clear understanding of the Dhamma in their mind, so that then they see Dhammas rising and fading away all the time, during whatever life they're doing, whatever action, whatever job, or whatever activity they have. And they will see it happening through that. As they learn to watch it more, as they learn to see the ego, they see the sankharas, the conditioning, more and more, then their samadhi will increase with that. So don't confuse samadhi with sitting like a log or a rock or something. Samadhi is something you can have. We can all have a samadhi here. We can have a certain absorption in our presence, in our present, and with our presence also, in what's happening. Those are just some ideas. I put on the board the 5 khandhas, which is, are you familiar with this? Yeah. Some schools don't use it so much. This was a system that existed before the Buddha's time. I mean, it's a very old way of seeing things, the 5 khandhas. It was not an invention of the Buddha himself. For me, that's one of the easiest ways of trying to see the self and how the things, you look at form, you look at feeling, you look at perception and memory. Conditioned response, which means also your action, volitional action and consciousness. I put up one more thing. Under samadhi there, I've put samahito. Samahito means that if you have these 3 qualities, your mind is collected, pure, and active, then they say that you're walking, you're standing, you're sitting, you're lying, is divine walking, or divine standing, or divine sitting and lying. Because the person who has that type of proper samadhi, he sees all dhammas as they are. Now, it doesn't mean that you're maybe completely enlightened, but at least when you have good practice, you will have periods in the day where you go out, for example, after the practice, you go to the shop, but you see everything as it's happening. And even sometimes you can be quite empty and cool. So I put nibbutto. Nibbutto is like temporary enlightenment that we can all taste sometimes. When you just do an action without the doer, you are walking without the walker, you are paying without the payer, you are telephoning without the telephoning. In other words, if you have to do something, you can do it, and the body is capable of, has its natural instincts. So the body can walk, the body can lie down, and you are just in your natural state. And you just witness what's happening, that's all, with no thinking and no attitude. So I put that there because people tend to make this path look like it's a sort of impossible mountain to climb, right? No, it is a very hard, it is a very hard path. But at the same time, you should understand that everybody can experience moments when they are clear. And it's very important to see those moments when they happen, to catch them, to see it, and to reflect on it afterwards. Ajahn Buddhadasa would always say that the 16 steps of anapanasati, should actually be the 17th step. The 17th step is you reflect on what has happened. So the 16 steps can be experienced with regard to, say, one small problem, that you can actually see it as impermanent, and it fades away, and there's cessation and returns to nature. So then, at that point, if something drops away, then you should watch it and you should look at it, you should understand how it happened. I would say that I would just pass this to you that since it's a long struggle, when we have a good day's work, we tend to not think about it too much. Just that, oh, I had a great meditation or good retreat, and go back and relax. But actually, if you have a good meditation, you shouldn't leave your meditation session and just say, right, I can go to dinner with a happy mind. If you have a good meditation, take 5 or 10 minutes after, take a walk or something, and just reflect on why did you have a good meditation? What were the factors that contribute? Because everything is conditioned. Everything is conditioned. So even your good moments, your bad moments, etc. So the more that you can take stock of what happens, the less of a mystical mystery it will be. You will start to see how a good day happens, how a bad day happens, and you will have a better chance at seeing what is blocking your progress and what will help you with your progress. Any questions?
Is it necessary for us to know Dharma before we practice meditation? Why did know Dharma means we have to read the book or listen to others before we practice meditation? And the second question is that can we learn Dharma through meditation?
Well, classically speaking, there is a thing called the threefold dispensation in the Buddha. And that is that first you have to, I think Tandusili mentioned this today, that you listen and you hear it. You have to understand first. Secondly, you practice it. And thirdly, you have the realization of the fruit or the action, you could say, of this. Now this is a controversial point with some. I have some friends that say that you have to do a lot of studying and reading. My own teachers didn't do it that way with me. They made me practice. And you understood it there. But actually you have to know a little bit what you are doing. For example, if you are fully convinced of the impermanence of everything, the basic, the three characteristics, that there is impermanence, and because everything is impermanent and we attach to it, there is suffering, and that basically there is not self. There is no ego, no inherent self in anything or any being. If you understand that and you feel that, then I think you can start to practice. And personally, I find that sitting practice, for example, is the greatest teacher of the Dhamma, but they go together. You know, as you sit, then you need to have somebody, you have some Dhamma talks as well. And I did my reading of the Buddha Dhamma. I've done not so much, and I did it much later. I didn't do it very much. I worked with the 5 khandhas, dependent origination, the Noble Eightfold Path, and the 4 Noble Truths. That was my only Dhamma for a few years. And the rest was just sitting and watching that process. But that is the heart of the Dhamma. You know the dependent origination? You know what they call the wheel of life. So the way I'm looking at it is not as a theory of rebirth, like in future lives, but in the way that the ego mind attaches and is born hundreds of times every day. So that Ajahn Buddhadasa has a very easy way of teaching that you just look at contact. You have 6 senses, right? Your touch and your eyes and ears, nose, mouth, mind. And through any of those doors, you can have a sense impression. So I can say something to you, and from the tone of my voice or the meaning of the words in the mind or whatever, you can have a positive reaction, a negative reaction, or a neutral reaction, right? But neutral is often not neutral. It's you are still thinking about it, you know, going around and round. You're not sure yes or no or whatever. At this contact, we get a feeling. The feeling translates normally into either this positive, negative, or don't know state. And this will produce attachment, and the attachment will produce a craving. In other words, a desire for more or to push it away or whatever. So traditionally in the Wheel of Life they will show a man looking at a woman and they touch, you know, or they kiss or something, and the next picture, the Tibetans, you will have an arrow in the eye or in the ear, which is showing that the contact, you know, and the feeling has hit. And then they get upadana, so the 5 khandhas, which are just form, feeling, perception, formations and consciousness. In this case they are called the upadana khandha, in other words, attachment khandhas. The aggregates, the groups of attachment. And this is actually the name of the game is to get rid of attachment to these things. So that the simplest way to start is that when you are sitting, when you watch things, or in your normal life, or just when we are relating in a group, you watch what happens with the contact. And you watch how many times you have a positive response or a negative response, or you don't like somebody, or you don't like people who dress like that, or who walk like this, or you know how so many things are happening every moment, and it's just going tick, tick, tick. So you just start to watch that, so that you can maintain as much as possible a detached mind, equanimity towards things. So in that sense, you don't have to study a lot, but you have to know what you are doing. You understand what I mean? So you don't necessarily have to do a lot of studying, but you should know the principles of how things work, the mechanics of you know, if you accept that we are all conditioned, you have to convince yourself how we are conditioned. You have to be sure of that okay, we get conditioned by this way, and you have to investigate it. Investigate it yourself and see. So actually, the listening or the learning does come first, but it can be a small amount if it's precise. Any other questions? I have noticed that more and more Asian people, for example in Thailand, they didn't practice yoga, and Ajahn Buddhadasa felt that yoga is good but at the beginning stage, because anapanasati is actually a type of pranayama. Prana in Sanskrit means the life force which is in the air, which you breathe. So the yogas, the Indian classical yoga, they have also an Eightfold Noble Path, actually, almost the same, Patanjali Yoga. And they have 8 limbs of yoga. So the first 2 are yama and niyama. It's very like, it's your observances and your restraints. In other words, your mode of conduct. It's like the sila, etc. And then you have the Hatha Yoga. Hatha Yoga develops a concentration, your samadhi, your sati. And the next yoga is working with the energy of the air, working with the air. So they have very developed ways of dealing with that. Holding your breath for a long time, breathing through one nostril, making blocks in the body, directing the air and the energy into certain areas of the body. The thing about anapanasati is that rather than concocting something, because that's all a concoction, that's building up something positive, something useful, but it's building something up, is that as you learn to relax and as you learn to watch with your sitting, your breathing gets finer and finer and much, much more relaxed and subtler, and you have much more energy. So you start to understand actually how this works inside you, and you find that your eating habits and everything can change because of the benefits of this. The only thing to add to that is that in modern life, for Westerners, I know people, I've been nearly 20 years interested in these things, and I have friends who are 15, 20 years older than me. I would say 80% of Westerners, even who are Thai monks or Theravada monks for 25 years or what, they have one system or another. They make Tai Chi or they make yoga or they make something. For most of us modern people from the West, we need to have something. And I notice that with Thais and Chinese and Malay Singapore and even Filipinos now, that they like it too. The people who are living in cities. And then more and more they are interested, they like to practice, they need to practice something. So it's maybe useful for people who are in cities, who are dealing with stress and who are struggling with those type of things. And I think that whether you have a very involved and evolved system of psychophysical maintenance or not, this is up to you, but you have to understand. You have to make an investigation of what healthy body is and healthy mind and how you want to deal with that. I don't know many meditators who haven't investigated diet, for example, how they sleep, exercise. I mean, we all have to face it at one time or another. So some people have a naturally calm disposition and they can keep a calm rhythm in life and they don't get many problems. In that case, the meditation alone will keep you very healthy, generally speaking. But most of us are not like that. Generally, it can help you a lot if you have something like that. It depends how you do it and who's teaching. If you're doing a proper yoga or Tai Chi with a proper master, then you're not doing gymnastics. You're not working with your muscles. You're working from inside the body, from the breath. So the relaxation occurs inside first with the respiratory muscles, and then it slowly opens out from the inside outside. And it's a completely different thing. This is not understood by many yoga teachers and many Tai Chi teachers actually. But because it's like that, it's possible for old people to do it, fat people, thin people. There is no block, and there is no kind of model for good yoga because everybody has a different body. So everybody will have a different program that they have to do. That's the only thing. I would say just select something that suits your needs. The thing about having a properly evolved discipline like yoga, for example, is that they took these sciences very far. That they also practice all the concentrations, and they develop your body and your nerves to a very subtle degree. That's the help for a meditator. So most people who meditate find that yoga enhances their meditation quite considerably. It opens what are called the nadis, the subtle channels in the body. And it strengthens and makes your body supple. But on the other hand, if you have success in the first stage of anapanasati, the same results will occur. That when you get piti, when you get rapture, you get a suppler body, your body starts to relax. People find that their sitting position improves and things like that. So this is something you can just try and develop yourselves. Swimming and walking, also very good. For hundreds of years have always been accepted as good activity, swimming or walking. Any other questions? Well, it depends what sort of work.
Hammering, repairing.
Yeah, I don't know whether you, some people might argue if you call it meditation when you're doing that, but it can certainly be a contemplative activity. Absolutely, yeah. The way we do it in Suamok in Thailand is we have this expression to walk without a walker, or work without a worker. For example, if you're hammering a nail, let's examine, you have to hammer something in. You can hammer it aggressively, or you can be looking at your watch and think, God, I've got 5 minutes to get 25 more nails in. You know, you're going to have something on your mind, right? Or you can have an attitude to yourself as you work, that you like to be a good worker, or you're powerful, or you try and hit it in with one hit, you know, all these things. Or you can imagine that you can just do what is necessary, what has to be done, with as empty as a mind as possible. So you just pick up the nail, you put it where you have to put it, you hit it the way you have to hit it, and you forget about it. You understand what I mean? So that's the practice we do with working. So when we're walking, we try and walk without a walker. In other words, let the body just do what the body knows how to do. It has an instinct to stand up, to walk. You know, you see people walking in their sleep, you know, or sometimes you find that you've walked 20, 30 meters without really paying attention. You don't have to have that thinking mind there. So you can reduce that activity and just watch. Just be aware. Actually, if you go on the street and you see the way people walk, they carry their egos with them in their walking. You know, people who are a little frightened in life, they are walking a little like this, and the people who are the macho man is walking down the street, and the lady who is, you know, everybody has their thing, huh? And even people, that's an exaggeration, but all of us are carrying in our posture, in our body, we are carrying the marks of our conditioning. So you just try to breathe out. When you breathe in, you relax. And when you breathe out, you try to drain off posturing, you know, holding any type of attitude, which will also be stamped into your posture.
We have to see how to solve the problem. And we have to, when looking, we have to see how to solve the problem. Then we cannot do it.
Yes, you can actually, in a way, because remember that we treat the mind just as a sense, like everything else, right? So, if you have learned how to do something, for example, say you're a carpenter or whatever, so you have to make a particular fitting for a building. You get to the point and you realize something has to be done. So you can just think about it in a normal way. You observe, you see that in your memory you have all the details. You're already a carpenter, for example, so you know what is what, you know what has to be done. You say, this is missing, this needs that, I have to measure that. You can do it with an empty mind.
It is a routine job. So if let's say it's a new job, you have to think how to solve the problem. Then
yes, but even that you can do with a relatively empty mind, because if you work on a new problem, you're using your old mind to develop a new problem. Huh? I mean, you don't develop a new mind for the new problem. You have your usual mind approaches the new problem. So you have to just call on everything you know. The question is not to get an attitude to it, not to start worrying about it, not to start getting ambitious about it, not to get attached to it, not to let it affect you in any particular way. Okay, let's call it a day. That was a long session.